And how are we supposed to know the good guys from the bad guys? Well, we were given a standard by which to judge them. You know, by their fruits, you'll know them. By their fruits. Anybody seen any good fruit lately? No. It's tough. And look, I'm a pretty sinful guy. I mean, I'm as venal as the next guy. But I know the difference between a shepherd and a hireling. And I think that the vast majority of these bishops are just a bunch of hirelings. You know. And my question is, you know, like, who's hiring them? I don't think it's Jesus. Is it Francis? Who's hiring Francis? Is it Pachamama? I mean, I think you need to look at the whole institution. And, you know, I'll quote Archbishop Vigano again in saying that he believes that there was a parallel counterfeit church set up to eclipse the real one. He's suggesting usurpation or an inside job. It seems that way. Anyway.
The instinct of the Christian people was always in the right direction, and it would be unjust to hold it responsible for the gross speculations and statements of some of the ante-Nicene teachers. In a word, the dogma of the Church on the Trinity was the work of 3 centuries and was not completed until the time of Nicaea.
The word Monarchiani was first used by Tertullian as a nickname for the Patripassian group in his treatise against Praxeas, and was seldom used by the ancients. In modern times, it has been extended to an earlier group of heretics who are distinguished as dynamistic or adoptionist. However, the adoptionists or dynamists have no claim to the title, for they did not start from the monarchy of God, and their error is strictly Christological. An account of them must, however, be given here simply because the name Monarchian has adhered to them in spite of the repeated protests of historians of dogma. But their ancient and accurate name was Theodosians. The unity of the divinity was commonly guarded by a reference to a unity of origin. It was said that God from eternity was alone, with his word one with him as reason. In Vulca Codis, Logos and Diathetos, before the word was spoken ex or patris, Logos prophophorikos, or was generated and became son for the purpose of creation. The Alexandrians alone insisted rightly on the generation of the Son from all eternity, but thus the unity of God was even less manifest. The writers who thus theologize may often expressly teach the traditional unity in Trinity, but it hardly squares with the Platonism of their philosophy. The theologians were thus defending the doctrine of the Logos at the expense of the 2 fundamental doctrines of Christianity, the unity of God and the divinity of Christ. They seemed to make the unity of the Godhead split into 2 or even 3, and to make Jesus Christ something less than the supreme God the Father. This is eminently true of the chief opponents of the Monarchians, Tertullian, Hippolytus, and Novatian. You can read from such sources in Thomas Newman's The Causes of Arianism. Monarchianism was the protest against this learned philosophizing, which to the simplicity of the faithful looked too much like a mythology or agnostic emanationism. The Monarchians emphatically declared that God is one, wholly and perfectly one, and that Jesus Christ is God, wholly and perfectly God. This was right, and even most necessary. And whilst it is easy to see why the theologians like Tertullian and Hippolytus opposed them, for the protest of the Monarchians was precisely against the Platonism which these theologians had inherited from Justin and the apologists, it is equally comprehensible that guardians of the faith should have welcomed at first the return of the Monarchians to the simplicity of the faith, lest they seem to be asserting two gods, or, on the other hand, denying the Saviour's Godhead. Origen on Titus Fragment 2. Tertullian, in opposing them, acknowledges that the uninstructed were against him. They could not understand the magic word oikonomia, the economy of God, with which he conceived he had saved the situation. However, they declared that he taught two or three gods, and cried, Monarchiam tenemus. So Callistus reproached Hippolytus, and not without reason, with teaching two gods.
And people would inquire of Jews, how can there only be one God? Why do you only worship one God? What is there about your God that makes him unique? And the favourite answer, I think, in Jewish theology was to say that God is the only sovereign creator of all things, and God is the only sovereign ruler of all things.
Right.
So anything else is God's creation, anything else is ruled by God. Creator and ruler are the keys, I think, to distinguishing the uniqueness of God. What the early Christians did, I think, was to come to see Jesus as actually included in that identity of God.
How is it possible for a being like that to take on flesh and still remain somehow God? I mean, what's the nature of a text like Philippians 2 about the divine condescension and the stripping off and all of that? How would you view that side of Christology? What actually are we being told about the Son when he took on flesh?
Yes, I think it is, Philippians, I think, focuses on the humiliation of it.
Right.
It's this up and down imagery,
right,
which is very strong in Jewish thought about God. They express the transcendence of God, his otherness to this world, by talking this imagery of height. God is as high as you can imagine, and so it's a descent from that divine height to the depths, not just of being human, but of being a crucified, a servant and a crucified criminal on the cross, death even to a cross. So it's a strong emphasis on the humiliation of it, I think. And in the end, I think what it's being said is that humiliation of God in his amazing love for the world is just as divine a thing as staying in heaven on the divine throne, worshipped by angels. And that's why at the end of the passage, having been humiliated to death on the cross, God has highly exalted him. In other words, he has done something divine, which doesn't make him God for the first time, but it makes him God, as it were, in a new way. Something which
so
needs.
He's given a new name.
Absolutely, yeah. That's right. Karl Barth has something that I think I've always found very helpful about how can God do this kind of thing. And he talks about the freedom of God. And he says God is free to be not only almighty, but also weak. God is free to be not only beyond suffering, but also to participate in suffering.
Right.
God is free not only to be God, but also to be human. And he said God is not his own prisoner. He's not, as it were, stuck within divine necessities that prevent him from doing these other things.